Welcome back. Student accommodation seems to be an annual crisis, and 2023 is no exception. Widespread protests have been sparked by the implementation of a yearly 45,000 rand accommodation cap by the National Student Financial Aid Scheme. NSFAS-funded students are worried they'll have to cough up the excess as varsity accommodation costs skyrocket. The scheme says it's working to ensure that no student is left stranded. Let's get the latest from the scheme's spokesperson, Slumezi Skosana. Thank you very much, Mr. Skosana, for your time this evening. We know it's certainly been a trying time over the past 2 weeks as we've seen student protests flare up at numerous universities across the country. So talk to us a little bit about the history of the unpopular 45,000 rand annual cap on student accommodation. Where does that come from?
I'm surprised that you are referring it to as an unpopular one when we have a commitment from the representative of students, that is Saus, supporting the full and implementation of the cap. So we, at the moment, maybe let me just go straight to the fact that it was arrived at following a process of consultation and research. And I think we have come to the understanding that we are on the right track in implementing it. Because for us, the main issue is the affordability of student housing, much more than anything.
So I think why I called it unpopular is because it's one of the main sticking points for students that have been protesting. And if we just look at the WITS protests this week, there have been a number of demands that they have made to the university. And one of those is for the removal of that cap. So let's get straight to the discussions between yourselves, the various SRCs across the country and university management. If you want to maybe use WITS as an example, I know there you have been very involved, especially over the last week. Can you tell us how NSFAS is coming to the party to try and assist students who are worried that they simply won't be able to pay their accommodation for the entire year with that 45,000 rand allowance?
Let me start by saying I am not aware of a university at this stage that says it's got accommodation and the accommodation is empty. And if the cap was lifted, that building would be immediately occupied. So but let me maybe share with you what we have done in terms of that. The cap, in our view, is fully justified. And what has happened so far is that we have engaged about 39 companies that are accrediting student accommodation establishment. And in the last 2 weeks, we've been working in the Eastern Cape and the Eastern Cape with prospective service providers whose list, once they have been accredited, we will provide to the institutions and the students. And in the next week, we are tackling Gauteng, Mpumalanga, as well as the Northwest, capping it up with the end of the week in Limpopo. Because we're trying to bring as many service providers into the fold as possible because of the frustrations that we have experienced. I have previously pointed out that the amount of money that NSFAS pays for accommodation, which is about 18 billion per annum as a component of the funding solution, it is too high. Because we do not understand why a student who lives in a single room should pay 7,000, 9,000 when that would get you a 3-bedroom apartment elsewhere. And in terms of the guidelines that were gazetted by our Honorable Minister, Dr. Blade Nzimande in 2015, the guidelines are very clear in terms of norms and standards. And when we look at the norms and standards of a typical university room, rather student room, we fail to understand why so much exorbitant fees should be charged for it.
So in fact, it's not a problem of a cap, it's a problem of overinflated accommodation prices. But unfortunately, the situation remains that there are far more students requiring accommodation in centralized locations than the university can provide for on campus, which leaves the door very much open for private accommodation suppliers to use this supply and demand tension to drive up pricing.
Correct. Because most of the universities, like your University of Pretoria, Wits University as well, they are in built-up areas. And I've maintained that even if you were to get, sorry to use Elon Musk, somebody to fund a student accommodation development, you would still have a problem of where you build those student housing. You would be forced to buy, around the universities. And if there's anything that maybe most people would not be aware of, is that, yes, there are challenges in terms of providing private accommodation, in the sense that there is also this thing called campus life, where the proximity to university amenities such as stadiums, sports fields, ground, gyms, and so on are pertinent in support of the student life there. But again, if a student has to pay, like he's paying for a bond, staying in a single room just to study and graduate, I think it's not, we cannot support that. And in terms of, you know this, maybe I don't have to repeat it, in terms of the South African Constitution, the government has a responsibility to make education progressively available and accessible to people, or rather to the youth of the country. And if we do not factor in affordability, then we haven't even started broadening access to education. We haven't even started making education accessible. Because if astronomical fees are to be paid to access education, it's going to cut out a lot of people that we are targeting as a fund. Because remember, we're targeting people whose parents or dependents, or rather supporters, earn less than 350,000, and people that are from far-flung areas that we're trying to pull out of poverty. Now, you cannot do so when you introduce people like those to fees that are so prohibitive for accommodation.
And I think if we look at the clarion call from the student protests over the last week or two, it has been for equitable access and for financial exclusion to become a thing of the past. So we're very glad to see that NSFAS is coming on board in terms of making sure that some of the the accommodation providers for universities across the country are going to adhere to more suitable pricing structures to make that accessible for students.
That is what we're looking forward to in this whole exercise. We understand fully well that the education and training sector, it's a huge one. It's actually estimated worldwide at $4 trillion US. I'm talking about a sector that is in the business of selling knowledge. And everybody in the value chain wants to make money. But we do not believe that people should profiteer, especially in the case of the South African situation, where the target at the moment through the fund is on previously disadvantaged individuals.
Thank you so much for sharing your insights with us this evening. That was NSFAS spokesperson Slumezi Skosana commenting on that 45,000 Rand annual cap for student accommodation, saying that cap is actually not the problem. The problem is, in fact, overinflated pricing for student accommodation.